Detective Theo Harper sat across from Chief Owens, the head detective, watching him slid a file with the words top secret on it to him. You want me to what? Theo asked. Go undercover in the Silver Vipers, the chief repeated, not even flinching. Theo leaned back. I thought you liked me. This isn't about what I like, the chief said dryly. It's about bringing down Asher Reed. The name made Theo stiffen. Everyone in law enforcement knew about Asher. He was untouchable and has never been caught on camera. I'm not exactly gang material, Theo said, gesturing at his very not intimidating cute cardigan. That's why we're giving you a full backstory, the chief replied, flipping open the file. You'll be Theo Blaze Carter, small-time crook looking for a big break. You've got a record and a bad attitude. Just stick to the script. You've got 2 weeks to prepare before you make contact. 2 weeks, Theo groaned. That's barely enough time. The chief ignored him, standing up and patting Theo's shoulder. You're the best undercover detective we've got. You can handle this. 2 weeks later, Theo stood outside a warehouse on the edge of town, wearing ripped jeans, a leather jacket, and a scowl that he hoped looked menacing. His palms were sweaty, his heart was racing, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was a terrible idea. He stepped inside the warehouse and a group of men turned to look at him, their faces filled with suspicion. You lost, buddy? One of them asked, a hostile look on his face. No, Theo said, lowering his voice to sound gruff. I'm here to see Asher. I've got skills. The men exchanged glances before bursting into laughter. Skills, huh? One of them mocked. Like what? Baking? Theo was about to retort when another voice cut through the room. That's enough. The men parted, and in walked Asher Reed. Theo's breath caught. He hadn't been expecting the man to look so hot. Asher's dark hair was perfectly styled. He was wearing a casual outfit and his smirk was so attractive. What's your name? Asher asked, his voice confident. Theo lowered his voice trying to sound tough. Theo Blaze Carter. Blaze, huh? Cute. Asher's smirk widened, clearly amused. He walked closer. So what makes you think you're Viper material? I'm good at fighting, Theo blurted out. Asher raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Prove it. Theo blinked. What? Asher motioned toward a huge man standing nearby. Spar with Greg here. Let's see what you've got. Theo swallowed hard. Greg was built like a tank. Theo tried to remember his self-defense training as Greg charged toward him. His plan was simple. Dodge and do not die. Greg swung a punch, and Theo barely ducked in time. Whoa, whoa, Theo said, holding up his hands. What's the rush? Let's talk this out like civilized criminals. Greg didn't reply. Instead, he grabbed a chair and hurled it at Theo, who yelped and dove out of the way. Time out, Theo shouted, scrambling to his feet. Do we even have insurance for this kind of thing? The men watching burst out laughing, and even Asher looked like he was trying not to grin. Eventually, Greg lunged again, but this time Theo sidestepped, stuck out his foot, and tripped him. The big man hit the ground with a loud thud. The room went silent. Oops, Theo said, trying not to look as terrified as he felt. Asher stared at him for a long moment before clapping slowly. Impressive. Theo exhaled in relief. Welcome to the Silver Vipers, Asher said with a smirk. Congratulations, Blaze. You're my new second-in-command. Theo's jaw dropped. Wait, what? One moment, Theo was avoiding getting beaten by Greg, and the next, he was being ushered into what Asher referred to as his new office. It was less an office and more of a lounge, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city skyline. Not bad, huh? Asher said, lounging on a couch. Theo glanced around nervously. Yeah, really. Nice. Asher leaned forward. You don't seem excited, Blaze. Most people would kill for this position. Theo plastered on what he hoped was a confident smile. Oh, I'm thrilled. Over the moon. Can't wait to, start second in commanding. Asher chuckled. Good. Because you've got your first job tonight. Theo blinked. Tonight. Yeah, Asher said casually. We've got a shipment coming in, and I need you to oversee the transaction. Make sure everything goes smoothly. Theo's stomach flipped. This was really bad. He hadn't even been here for 24 hours, and now he was in charge of something illegal. He needed to think of a way out of this without blowing his cover. Sure, no problem, Theo said, trying to sound confident. But, maybe you should come with me. You know, to, supervise my first day as your second-in-command, just in case I mess up. Asher raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. You're nervous. No, Theo said quickly. I'm not nervous. Just thorough. Asher leaned back, a smirk on his face. All right, Blaze, I'll come with you. Let's see what you've got. Hours later, Theo found himself standing at the docks, squinting at a shipping container. Where's the crew? Theo asked, glancing around. They're on their way, Asher said, pulling out a cigarette. So, what exactly is in the shipment? Asher took a drag of his lit cigarette. Don't worry about it. Just make sure it gets where it needs to go. Theo felt his eye twitch. Don't worry about it. Suddenly, a black SUV pulled up, and a group of men got out, each carrying a duffel bag. Here we go, Asher said, motioning for Theo to follow him. As they approached the group, Theo tried to look tough, but his mind was racing. What if this was a drug deal, or weapons, or something worse? The leader of the group, a buff man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. Asher, he said with a nod, everything's ready. Asher gestured to Theo. Blaze here is handling things tonight. Theo's heart skipped a beat. I am. Of course, Asher said, his tone light but his eyes sharp. You're my second in command, remember? Theo swallowed hard. Right. Of course. Let's do this. The men began opening the duffel bags, and Theo braced himself for the worst. But when he saw what was inside, he froze. What the hell is this? Theo asked, staring down at the contents of the bag. Designer watches, the scarred man said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Theo blinked. Watches? Asher chuckled. Top-of-the-line knockoffs. Worth a fortune on the black market. Theo couldn't believe it. All this secrecy, all this tension. For watches? Problem? Asher asked, clearly enjoying Theo's reaction. Theo forced a laugh. No problem at all. Just impressed by the, craftsmanship. Asher's smirk widened. Good. Now make sure everything goes smoothly. Theo sighed internally. If he didn't get out of this soon, he was going to lose his mind. That night, Theo sat hunched over his tiny laptop in the cramped motel room that served as his safe house. With a deep breath, he opened the secure line to Chief Owens, who appeared on the screen moments later, looking grumpier than usual. You're late, Owens barked, squinting at Theo. What took so long? Sorry, Chief, Theo muttered. I had to make sure I wasn't followed. Ash's got eyes everywhere. Owens leaned closer to the screen. And? Theo sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not what I expected. The big operation at the docks, it wasn't drugs or weapons. It was knockoff designer watches. Owens blinked. Watches? Yeah, Rolexes, Omegas, you name it, Theo said, slumping back in his chair. Apparently, Ash's crew makes a killing selling them on the black market. It's all very anticlimactic. Don't underestimate them, Owens said sharply. These gangs use smaller operations like that to fund bigger, more dangerous ones. If Ash is involved, there's more to it than you're seeing. Maybe, Theo said, his tone skeptical. But so far, he seems more like a businessman than a kingpin. And somehow, I'm his second in command now, which means I can't exactly keep a low profile. That's good, Owens said, a glint of approval in his eyes. You're in a prime position to get closer to him. Closer? Theo frowned. How much closer do you want me to get? He already made me handle the docks deal. I barely knew what I was doing. You'll figure it out, Owens said dismissively. He grabbed a folder and held it up to the camera. Here's your next mission. There's a poker game tomorrow night at an underground casino Asher usually goes. You need to be there. Theo blinked. A poker game? Chief, I don't even know how to play poker. You don't have to win, Owens said, smirking slightly. You just need to get intel. We need to know who Ash is working with. Great, Theo muttered sarcastically, because sneaking around an illegal casino sounds so easy. Oh, one more thing, Owens added. You'll need to get Asher to bring you as his guest. That's your way in, so technically there's no sneaking around. Theo stared at him, deadpan. You want me to ask the most dangerous man in the city to take me on a date to a poker game? Call it whatever you want, Owens said, clearly unbothered. Just get it done. And remember, Harper, don't blow your cover. We're counting on you. Before Theo could argue, Owens ended the call, leaving him alone in his motel room with a sinking feeling in his gut. The next day, Theo found himself back in Ash's lounge, nervously rehearsing how to bring up the poker game. Asher was leaning against the bar, casually sipping an espresso. Spit it out, Blaze, Asher said without looking up. You've been hovering for 5 minutes. Theo froze. Smooth Theo. Real smooth. Well, he stammered, shoving his hands into his pockets. I heard about this, poker game happening tomorrow night. Thought maybe we could, go together. Asher finally looked up, one eyebrow raised in amusement. Are you asking me on a date? What? No, Theo blurted, his face heating up. It's not a date, it's just business. To keep an eye on things. Asher smirked, clearly enjoying Theo's discomfort. Right, business. And you think you're ready for something like that? Theo straightened up, trying to look confident. Of course I am. I'm your second in command, remember? Asher chuckled, setting down his espresso. All right, Blaze, I'll take you, but you better not embarrass me. Theo grinned, surprised at how easily he agreed. Don't worry, I'll blend right in. Asher's smirk widened. Somehow, I doubt that. On the way to the casino, Theo sat stiffly in the back seat of the car, feeling wildly out of place in the sharp, tailored suit Asher had insisted he wear. Even though he had to admit he looked good, it only heightened his discomfort. Asher, on the other hand, lounged beside him, using confidence. He had discarded his jacket and loosened the top two buttons of his black dress shirt, revealing just a hint of his toned chest, and Theo was doing his best not to notice. You clean up better than I expected, Asher said, his gaze sharp. Theo glanced at him, his ears burning. Thanks. You don't sound too convinced, Asher teased, leaning closer. What? Not used to dressing up, or is it me making you nervous? Theo stiffened. Why would you make me nervous? Asher's smirk deepened. I don't know. You tell me. Before Theo could come up with a response, Asher shifted even closer, his thigh brushing against Theo's. Theo's breath hitched, and he immediately shifted back, only to realize there was nowhere else to go. So Asher began, his voice dropping, low and intimate. Tell me, Blaze, what's a guy like you doing in this line of work? You don't strike me as the criminal type. Theo cleared his throat, desperately trying to focus on anything other than Asher's body so close to his. Just trying something new, I guess. Really? Asher drawled, his tone laced with disbelief. A pretty face like yours could have picked something easier, safer. Theo coughed, his cheeks flaming. I'm not. What does my face have to do with anything? Asher chuckled, his gaze lazily traveling over Theo. It's just an observation. Theo was pretty sure he was about to combust. Well, maybe you should keep your observations to yourself. Asher tilted his head, feigning innocence. Why, am I making you uncomfortable? Theo opened his mouth to retort, but Asher suddenly leaned in, bracing a hand against the seat behind Theo's head. His other hand lightly grazed Theo's thigh, tugging at it just enough to make Theo's heart slam against his ribs. Relax, Blaze, Asher murmured, his lips curving into a sly grin. You're wound up so tight, it's like you've never been this close to someone before. Theo's throat went dry. I'm fine, he croaked. You sure about that? Asher asked, his voice low and teasing. He leaned even closer, and Theo could feel the heat of his breath against his skin. From the front seat, the driver cleared his throat loudly. Theo practically jumped out of his skin, jerking back so quickly that his head hit the window. Asher, unfazed, sat back with a satisfied smirk, casually adjusting his cuffs like nothing had happened. Sorry, the driver said gruffly. They got to the underground casino. It was buzzing with energy, a mix of low chatter, and the occasional burst of laughter filling the air. The space was lavishly decorated, with red velvet drapes, golden chandeliers, and tables arranged neatly under the dim lighting. Theo stuck close to Asher as they entered, his eyes darting around nervously. Asher, a man with a thick beard and an even thicker accent, greeted him with open arms near one of the tables. It's been a while. Giorgio, Asher replied smoothly, shaking the man's hand. Good to see you. Giorgio gave a laugh before his eyes landed on Theo. And who's this? This is Blaze, Asher said casually, resting a hand on Theo's shoulder. My second in command. Theo managed to give a tight smile. Nice to meet you. Second in command, huh? Giorgio said, giving Theo a look. You don't look like the usual muscle Asher drags around. He's full of surprises, Asher said, his tone light. Before Giorgio could reply, a voice cut through the conversation. Well, who's the pretty one? Theo turned to see a man with a smile approaching them, and his eyes were locked onto Theo. I don't believe we've met, the man said, extending a hand to Theo while ignoring Asher entirely. Name's Nico. Theo hesitated, glancing at Asher, whose jaw had tightened just enough to make Theo anxious. Blaze, Theo said finally, shaking Nico's hand. Blaze, Nico repeated, his grin widening. What an intriguing name. I like it. It suits you. Thanks, Theo said awkwardly, taking a step back and bumping into Asher, who still hadn't said a word. Nika tilted his head, clearly enjoying himself. You're new around here, aren't you? Let me guess, you're the brains of the operation. Theo opened his mouth to respond, but Asher cut in, his tone cold. Blaze doesn't need anyone guessing anything about him. Nika raised an eyebrow, his grin never faltering. Relax, Asher. Just making conversation. No need to get territorial. Territorial, Asher repeated, his voice low and dangerous. I don't think you understand what you're stepping into, Nika. Theo's eyes darted between the two men, feeling very much like a rabbit caught between two wolves. All right, boys, Giorgio said, stepping in before things could escalate. Let's save the drama for the cards, yeah. Asher gave Nika one last glare before turning to Theo. Come on, Blaze. Let's grab a seat. Asher and Theo sat down at one of the poker tables, joined by Giorgio, Nika, and a few others. Theo, who barely knew the rules of poker, tried to keep his head down and his expressions neutral, hoping he wouldn't accidentally blow his cover. As the game progressed, Theo felt Nika's eyes on him, the man's flirtatious smile never wavering. You know, Nika said casually as he placed his bet, I don't usually like playing poker, but tonight's got some unexpected perks. Theo's face burned, and he could feel Asher's glare boring into the side of Nika's head. Focus on your cards, Nika, Asher said coldly. What? Can't a guy appreciate good company? Nika replied, grinning. He looked directly at Theo. What do you say, Blaze? Maybe after this, you and I could grab a drink, get to know each other better. Theo's mouth went dry. He's busy, Asher interrupted, his voice leaving no room for argument. Asher's hand clenched around his glass. He leaned closer to Theo, his voice low enough that only Theo could hear. You're not seriously considering that, are you? Considering what? Theo whispered back, his heart racing. Letting Nika charm you into something stupid, Asher said, his tone cold. Theo blinked, caught off guard by the sudden intensity in Asher's gaze. I'm not. He's just talking. Good, Asher said, leaning back but keeping his eyes on Nika. Because if he tries anything else, he won't leave this table in one piece. So, Asher began, leaning back in his chair as he glanced at Giorgio. How's the import business treating you these days? Giorgio frowned slightly. Nothing we can't handle. The usual nonsense with customs, but we've got a guy smoothing things over. The docks are busier than ever, thanks to you. Theo listened carefully, mentally taking note of every word. Good to hear, Asher replied, tossing his cards onto the table with a grin. Nika spoke this time, his smile turning more serious. I heard you've got some new partners lined up. Word is they're big players. Asher's expression didn't change, but Theo noticed the amusement in his eyes. You know how rumors are, Nika. Always half true at best. Half true, huh? Nika said, leaning forward. So there is some truth to it. Asher shrugged, swirling the drink in his glass. Let's just say I've been having some productive conversations. Giorgio grunted in approval. Whoever you're working with must have serious pull. Moving product across the border has never been this easy. Your guy must have connections everywhere. Everywhere? Theo asked, absent-mindedly. The table fell silent for a moment, and Theo cursed himself internally. Blaze is always eager to learn, Asher said smoothly, placing a hand on Theo's shoulder in what seemed like a gesture of reassurance. He's got a good head for the business. That's why he's here. Theo forced a tight smile, his heart pounding. Well, Giorgio said, it's true. Whoever Asher's got in his corner knows their stuff. Customs, local authorities, even the supply chains, everything runs like clockwork. Nika leaned back in his chair, a sly grin on his face. Let me guess, it's Salvatore, isn't it? Asher laughed, shaking his head. Nice try, Nika. Theo's mind raced. Salvatore. That name hadn't come up in any of his briefings. You'll know when you need to know, Asher said, his voice carrying a finality that ended the topic. Now, are we going to play, or are we just going to gossip all night? The men laughed, the tension easing, but Theo remained silent, the name Salvatore echoing in his mind. After the poker game, Theo followed Asher out of the casino, his thoughts a jumbled mess of questions. Not bad for your first game, Asher said as they climbed into the car. I didn't even play, Theo muttered, still distracted. You played your role, Asher said, his tone teasing. That's what matters. Theo frowned. Who's Salvatore? Asher stiffened slightly, but his smirk never faltered. You've got a lot of questions tonight, don't you? You can't blame me for being curious, Theo said, trying to sound casual. Asher studied him for a moment before leaning closer, his gaze intense. Curiosity can be dangerous, Blaze, especially in this line of work. Theo swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. I'm just trying to do my job. Good, Asher said, his voice low. Then stick to what I tell you, and don't go looking for answers. Theo nodded, unsure whether Asher's words were a warning or something else entirely. The car was parked outside the casino. Theo opened the door to the front seat and sat beside the driver. Asher raised an eyebrow at Theo's choice of seating. Front seat, huh? You're really trying to avoid me tonight. Theo shut the door without answering, pretending to adjust his seatbelt as the driver stifled a chuckle. Asher sighed dramatically, shaking his head before climbing into the back seat. Fine, Asher muttered, his tone laced with mock disappointment. I guess I'll just sit back here by myself. The car started driving back to the house. Blaze, Asher called from the back, his voice playful. Are you mad at me? You're not usually this quiet. I'm just tired, Theo replied shortly, keeping his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Asher chuckled. Tired, huh? Sure. That's what it is. Theo gritted his teeth, not responding. As soon as Theo got back to his apartment that night, he locked the door and pulled out the burner phone Chief Owens had given him. He dialed the chief's number and the chief immediately picked up. Theo, Chief Owens greeted. What have you got for me? I learned something tonight, Theo said, keeping his voice low despite being alone. There's a name you need to look into, Salvatore. One of the guys at the poker table mentioned him. Apparently, he's got connections everywhere. Customs, local authorities, supply chains. If Ash is working with him, it's big. Salvatore, the chief repeated, that's new. Are you sure? Positive, Theo said firmly. Even Asher didn't deny it, and he's usually tight-lipped about his partners. This guy might be the key to their entire operation. Chief Owens hummed thoughtfully. Good work, Theo. I'll get my team on it. Keep your head down for now, and don't let Asher catch on that you're digging. I know, Theo said, his voice clipped. I'm being careful. Good. Theo hung up, leaning back against the wall. For the first time, he felt like he was making progress with the mission. The next day, Theo was back at Ash's main hideout. Blaze, Asher called from across the room. Theo looked up, his heart skipping a beat. Ash's tone was casual, but his eyes told another story. Yeah, Theo replied, trying to sound indifferent. Come here, Asher said, gesturing with a flick of his fingers. Theo hesitated but stood, his legs feeling oddly heavy as he walked toward Asher. As soon as he got close, Asher grabbed his wrist, tugging him sharply into a secluded corner of the room. What are you? Theo started, but the words died in his throat as Asher pressed him against the wall, his hand resting beside Theo's head. You've been acting weird, Asher said, his voice low and his piercing gaze locked onto Theo's, searching for answers. Care to explain? Theo swallowed hard. I don't know what you're talking about. Asher's gaze hardened. You're a terrible liar, Blaze. I'm not lying, Theo insisted. Oh, Asher leaned in closer, their faces inches apart. Then why have you been avoiding me, sitting in the front seat, dodging my questions, and now you're acting like a deer caught in headlights? I've been tired, Theo said, wincing at how lame the excuse sounded. Asher tilted his head, studying Theo intently. Funny how you only got tired after the poker game. What happened, Blaze? Did someone say something that spooked you? Theo clenched his fists at his sides, his mind scrambling for a way out. No. I'm just trying to do my job, okay? Your job, huh? And what exactly is your job, Blaze? Because sometimes, I feel like you're working for someone else. Theo's breath hitched, and he froze under Asher's intense gaze. Got nothing to say, Asher murmured. You're hiding something. I can feel it. I'm not hiding anything, Theo said, forcing the words out despite his racing heart. You're imagining things. Am I? Asher's free hand brushed against Theo's side, making him flinch. Because if I find out you're playing me, Blaze, it won't end well for you. Theo's throat was dry, his body tense as Asher leaned even closer, his lips almost brushing Theo's ear. Think carefully about what you're doing, Asher said, his voice soft but laced with warning. Because I don't tolerate betrayal. With that, Asher pulled back. You're dismissed. Theo stumbled away from the wall, his heart pounding as he left the room. He knew that Asher was dangerously close to uncovering the truth. The next week, Theo was loading boxes in the storage room of the hideout. He hasn't seen Asher throughout the week. He was doing his best to blend in, but unfortunately, blending in wasn't an option today. Hey Blaze, a voice called from behind him. Theo turned to see Knox, one of the members of Ash's crew, leaning against the doorway, with a frown on his face. Knox had always been hostile, but ever since Theo had joined as Ash's second-in-command, his hostility had ramped up into outright bullying. "What do you want?" Theo asked, keeping his voice neutral as he turned back to the boxes. "You don't belong here," Knox said, stepping closer. "You think just because Ash has got a soft spot for you, you're untouchable?" "I'm just doing my job," Theo replied, forcing himself to stay calm. "Your job?" Knox mocked, grabbing Theo by the collar and shoving him against the wall. "You're nothing but a charity case, and you're sure as hell not good enough to be Ash's right-hand man." Theo winced as his back hit the hard surface. He opened his mouth to reply, but Knox tightened his grip, cutting him off. "What do you even do around here, huh? If it were up to me, you'd be out on the street." "That's enough," a familiar voice cut in. Knox froze, his hand still gripping Theo's collar, as Asher stepped into the room. His expression was calm, but the look in his eyes made it clear he wasn't in the mood for games. "Asher, I was just—" "Save it," Asher interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. "You don't touch him. Ever." Knox reluctantly let go of Theo, muttering something under his breath before walking out of the room. Theo exhaled shakily, adjusting his shirt as Asher approached. "You okay?" Asher asked, his voice softer now. "Yeah," Theo replied. "Come with me," Asher said, gesturing toward the door. Asher drove Theo out of the city, the tension from the hideout slowly easing out. The car passed through a dark forest and Theo wondered if Asher was taking him out here to unalive him for a moment, but he felt relieved when the road opened up to a serene lakeside. Asher parked the car and got out, gesturing for Theo to follow. "This is nice," Theo said surprisingly, taking in the beautiful view. "It's my favorite place," Asher said, his voice unusually soft. "I come here when I need to clear my head." They walked to the edge of the lake and Asher sat down on a log, motioning for Theo to join him. After a long silence, Asher spoke. "You know, I didn't start this gang because I wanted to. It wasn't about power or money at first." Theo turned to him, surprised by the vulnerability in his tone. "I grew up with nothing," Asher continued, his gaze fixed on the water. "My mom worked herself to death trying to keep a roof over our heads. My dad, he wasn't around." Theo stayed quiet, sensing this wasn't the time to interrupt. "When she died, I was 16. No money, no family, no one to turn to. I did what I had to do to survive, stealing, fighting, whatever it took. Eventually, I found other kids like me, and we stuck together. That's how it started. A group of nobodies trying to protect each other." Asher let out a bitter laugh. "But things change. You start small, and before you know it, you're running an empire. And people look at you like you're some kind of monster." "You're not a monster," Theo said quietly. Asher glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "You don't know me, Blaze. Not really." "Maybe not," Theo admitted, "but I know enough to see that you care. About your people. About doing what you think is right, even if it's messy." Asher studied him for a moment, a flicker of something softer crossing his face. "You're different, you know that. You don't back down." Theo's cheeks warmed at the unexpected compliment. "Thanks," he mumbled, looking away. Asher smirked, leaning back on his hands. "Don't let it go to your head." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the peaceful surrounding easing Theo's nerves, and he felt like he was beginning to understand the man behind the criminal facade. "You ever take time for yourself, Blaze?" Asher asked, breaking the silence. Theo glanced at him, frowning slightly. "I guess I don't really have the luxury, not in my line of work." Asher chuckled, leaning closer. "I can't figure you out." "There's nothing to figure out," Theo replied, shrugging. "Oh, I don't believe that," Asher said, his smirk returning. "You're like a puzzle with a couple of missing pieces. Makes me curious." Theo rolled his eyes, but before he could respond, Asher reached out, brushing a stray leaf off Theo's shoulder. The touch was light, almost casual, but it sent a shiver down Theo's spine. Theo stiffened, his heart hammering as Ash's hand lingered just a moment too long. I don't think." "You don't think what?" Asher interrupted, his gaze locked on Theo's face. Theo swallowed hard, unable to look away. The air between them suddenly felt charged. Asher leaned in, his eyes flicking briefly to Theo's lips before returning to his wide eyes. "Asher," Theo warned, his voice shaky. But Asher ignored him, closing the distance and pressing his lips to Theo's. For a moment, Theo froze, his mind going blank. The kiss was surprisingly soft. It was as if Asher were testing the waters. But then reality came crashing back, and Theo shoved Asher back, his hands shaking as he scrambled to his feet. "What the hell was that?" Theo exclaimed, his voice louder than he intended. Asher blinked up at him from where he'd stumbled back, his expression a mix of amusement and hurt. "You didn't seem to hate it." What?" Theo stuttered, his face flushing a deep red. "You can't just do that." "Why not?" Asher asked, standing and dusting himself off. "It felt right." Theo glared at him, crossing his arms as he tried to steady his breathing. "Well, it wasn't right. Don't do it again." Asher stepped closer, his expression serious. "Blaze, relax. I'm not trying to mess with you. I just—" He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. "You just what?" Theo demanded, his heart still racing. Asher shook his head. "Forget it." He turned and walked a few steps away, his back to Theo as he stared out over the lake. The silence between them hung thick in the air. Theo's chest was still heaving as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. A sudden crack echoed through the air, a sound that made Theo's instincts flare. "Get down," Theo barked, grabbing Asher by the arm and yanking him to the ground just as a bullet whizzed past where Asher had been standing. "Snipers," Asher hissed, his body tensing immediately. Theo crouched low, his heart pounding. "Looks like it." Another shot rang out, hitting the log they'd been sitting on minutes ago. "They're not messing around," Asher said grimly, his tone far more serious now. He peeked out from behind a rock, scanning the trees. "How the hell did they find us out here?" Crawling low to the ground, Theo tried to get a better angle to spot the shooters. A flicker of movement caught his eye. "There," Theo whispered, pointing. Asher followed his gaze and nodded. "3 of them, maybe more. I'll distract them. You take one of them from behind." Theo shot him a look. "That's a terrible plan." "Do you have a better one?" Asher retorted. Theo sighed. "Fine. But if you get yourself killed, I'm not taking the blame." "Noted," Asher said with a grin, and before Theo could argue further, Asher darted out from behind the rock, running towards some trees as bullets rained behind him. "For the love of—" "He's insane," Theo muttered under his breath. Using the distraction Asher created, Theo crept closer to the snipers. He spotted one of the snipers on a tree, his focus entirely on Asher. Theo didn't hesitate. With precise aim, he fired, hitting the man's rifle and knocking it from his hands. The shooter swore loudly, scrambling to recover, but Theo was already on him. "Drop it," Theo shouted, his gun trained on the man. The sniper hesitated, but the look in Theo's eyes made him think twice, and he raised his hands in surrender. Asher was on the third shooter in seconds, tackling him to the ground. The 2 men wrestled, until Asher pinned the shooter down. "You good?" Asher called over his shoulder, his voice. "Fine," Theo replied, tying up the first sniper's hands with a strip of cloth he'd ripped from the guy's own shirt. Asher knocked out his opponent with a final punch and stood, brushing off his jacket. "That was fun." Theo glared at him. "You have a very twisted definition of fun." Theo noticed a small cut on Asher's temple. "You're bleeding," he said, stepping closer to inspect it. "It's nothing," Asher said dismissively, though he didn't pull away when Theo tilted his head to get a better look. Theo sighed, shaking his head. "You're reckless." "And you're uptight," Asher shot back. Theo chuckled. "Come on, let's get out of here before more show up." "Agreed," Asher said, both of them grabbing the 3 unconscious snipers. "Let's take these guys back to the hideout. They have to tell us who sent them." The hideout was quieter when they returned. Theo followed Asher into his office, their captives dragged off by some of the guys. Theo glanced at Asher's temple again, the cut now more visible under the lights. "Set," Theo said, pointing to the chair by the desk. "I told you, it's nothing," Asher replied, but the edge in his voice had softened. "And I told you, sit down," Theo shot back, grabbing the first aid kit off a nearby shelf. Asher raised an eyebrow, his lips curving into an amused smirk. "Bossy tonight, aren't we?" "Just sit," Theo said, ignoring the heat rising in his cheeks. Asher finally sat down with a dramatic sigh. Theo sat on chair in front of him. He dabbed a cloth with antiseptic and leaned in, carefully cleaning the cut. "Hold still," Theo muttered when Asher winced slightly. "Easy for you to say," Asher retorted, his eyes fixed on Theo's concentrated expression. Theo could feel Asher's gaze on him as he worked. His hands trembled slightly, but he forced himself to focus on the task. "Why are you staring at me?" Theo asked without looking up, his voice betraying his nerves. "Can't help it," Asher said simply, his tone low and teasing. "Stop it." "Stop what?" "That," Theo said, finally meeting Asher's gaze. Asher smirked, his eyes locking with Theo's. "You're easy to fluster, you know that." Theo's face burned. "I'm not flustered." "Really? Because your ears are really red right now." Theo pulled back, glaring at him. Do you want me to help you or not? Asher chuckled, leaning back slightly. Fine, I'll behave. The room fell quiet again as Theo finished dressing the wound. When he was done, he stood, avoiding Ash's gaze. There, done. Asher stood too, towering over Theo as he stepped closer. Thanks, Blaze. Before Theo could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Boss, one of the gang members called, poking his head in. The snipers are ready for questioning. Asher nodded. Be right there. Two snipers were tied to chairs in the basement. Theo stood by Ash's side. He wondered where the other sniper was at, but he assumed that maybe he was still with the other guys. Let's make this simple, Asher began, his tone cold. Who sent you? The taller of the two snipers scoffed. You think we're just gonna tell you? Asher smirked, pulling a knife from his belt and flipping it casually in his hand. I don't think. I know. Theo raised an eyebrow but said nothing, letting Asher work. It didn't take long for the intimidation to work. The shorter sniper cracked first. It was Salvatore. He blurted, earning a glare from his partner. Salvatore, Asher repeated, his tone sharp. Yeah, the man stammered. He heard you've been getting too close to his territory. He wanted to send a message. Message received, Asher said coldly. Before he could question them further, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from upstairs. One of the gang members burst into the room, panting. Boss, one of them escaped. What? Asher growled, spinning to face him. He must have picked his restraints. He's gone, the gang member explained. Asher cursed under his breath, running a hand through his hair. Theo would have suggested they go after him, but it was too late and they know they didn't have a chance. The sniper must have already reported back to Salvatore. It has been too long since he escaped. Asher was unusually quiet, staring blankly at the city from the floor-to-ceiling glass window. Theo leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. You're overthinking, he said. Asher's eyes flicked to him, and for a moment, they softened. You think. I know, Theo replied, pushing off the wall and walking over. He might have told Salvatore something, but you've handled worse, right? Asher's gaze lingered on Theo, with a worried look on his face. You don't get it. This isn't just about territory. Salvatore's dangerous, and if he thinks he has an edge. Theo gave a small, reassuring smile. Then we'll deal with it. Together. Asher nodded, though the uneasiness he felt still remained. Later that night, Theo had decided to step out for some fresh air, needing a break from the tension inside. He didn't see the van until it was too late. He felt a sharp sting to his neck before falling unconscious. When Theo woke up, he realized he was tied to a chair in a dimly lit warehouse. Across from him stood Salvatore, a tall man with a slicked-back graying hair and a predatory smile that sent chills down Theo's spine. Well, Salvatore said, clapping his hands together. If it isn't Ash's little shadow. Theo blinked, trying to shake off the dizziness he felt from whatever they'd injected him with. What? What do you want? What I want, Salvatore said, leaning closer, is to watch Asher suffer. And you, my dear, are the perfect way to do that. Theo's stomach twisted. You've got the wrong guy. I'm just his second in command. Salvatore chuckled darkly. Oh, don't play dumb. My little bird told me how close you two are. You're his weakness, whether he admits it or not. Theo's heart raced, but he kept his expression neutral. You're delusional. Am I? Salvatore straightened, pacing around the room. You see, Asher likes to play the role of the big, bad criminal. But he's nothing compared to me. I've built an empire, crushed anyone who dared to cross me. And now, I'll do the same to him. Funny, Theo said, his voice steady despite his fear. Because you're the one who looks scared. Salvatore stopped, his smile fading. You've got all this power, Theo continued, but you're still so terrified of Asher that you had to kidnap me to get to him. That's pathetic. Salvatore's eyes darkened, and he grabbed Theo by the collar, yanking him forward. Careful, boy. You're in no position to mock me. Theo smirked, though his heart was pounding. Hit a nerve, did I? Salvatore released him with a shove. You're bold, I'll give you that. But let's see how bold you are when Asher gets here. Because when he does, I'm going to make him choose, his life or yours. Meanwhile, at the hideout, Asher was angry and worried. The moment he'd realized Theo was missing, he turned the hideout upside down, demanding answers from everyone. It wasn't long before he got the call. Asher, Salvatore's voice drawled on the other end of the line. I believe I have something of yours. Asher's grip tightened on the phone. Where is he? Now, Salvatore said mockingly. Don't be so hasty. If you want him back, you'll come to the docks, alone. You lay a hand on him, and I'll. You'll what? Salvatore interrupted, his tone dripping with amusement. You're in no position to make threats, my boy. But don't worry, I'll take good care of him until you arrive. Theo sat in the warehouse, trying to keep his nerves under control. He replayed Salvatore's words in his head, piecing together the puzzle. He's the one, Theo muttered to himself, as he finally pieced together the puzzle. Salvatore has been the one the chief had been after. The operation, the drugs, the weapons, the disappearances. Salvatore framed Asher to keep the heat off him. Theo's mind raced. If Asher arrived without backup, this would all go south quickly. Back at detectives' headquarters, Chief Owens was pacing around his office as he found out Theo has being kidnapped. One of Chief Owens' tech analysts burst into the room. Sir, you need to see this. The analyst laid out a series of documents on the table. This is Salvatore Di Luca, the analyst began, pointing to an image of Salvatore. He's been distributing weapons and drugs across the region. The money trails lead directly to shell companies tied to Asher's name. He framed Asher to stay under the radar. Chief Owens leaned in, his eyes narrowing. And the connection to Theo. We believe Salvatore found out Theo would be leveraged to get Asher to cooperate. Chief Owens straightened. Does Salvatore know Theo's a cop? No, sir, the analyst said. As far as we can tell, he thinks Theo's just Asher's second-in-command. The chief nodded, a plan forming in his mind. Get me Asher's location. If we're going to do this, we need him on our side. Asher stood in his office. The thought of Theo in Salvatore's hands made his blood boil. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. What? He snapped. One of his men poked his head in. Boss. There's someone here to see you. Not now. It's the cops. Asher's eyes darkened, and he turned, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun at his hip. What the hell do they want? The door opened wider, and Chief Owens stepped in, followed by 2 officers. I'm not here to fight, the chief said, holding his hands up. You've got guts walking in here, Chief. I'm here about Theo. We know where he is, and we know who Salvatore really is. But if we're going to take him down, we'll need your help, Owens said. At the mention of Theo's name, Asher's expression shifted, a flicker of worrying on his face. You expect me to trust you. You care about Theo, don't you? Owens asked, his voice steady. Because I do too. He's one of mine. Asher froze, the weight of Owens's words sinking in. He's a cop. Owens nodded. And a damn good one. He went undercover to investigate you, but he discovered the truth about Salvatore instead. Now, Salvatore's using him to get to you. If we don't act fast, we could lose him, and you'll lose your chance to clear your name. Asher clenched his jaw, his mind racing. Finally, he nodded. What's the plan? The rescue mission was set in motion quickly. Asher and his men partnered with the police. The plan was simple. While the police raided Salvatore's warehouse from one side, Asher's crew would do the same from the other, leaving no room for escape. Inside Salvatore's warehouse, Salvatore's men had become restless, and the crime lord himself was pacing. An explosion shook the walls of the building and chaos erupted. Gunfire echoed through the warehouse as Asher's crew stormed in from one side and the police from the other. Asher's eyes scanned the room until they landed on Theo, tied to a chair in the center. Theo? Asher shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. Theo's head snapped up, relief flooding his face. Took you long enough. Asher shot the guard closest to Theo before rushing to him, cutting through the ropes with a knife. You okay? Asher asked, his hands lingering on Theo's shoulders. I am now, Theo said, a small smile playing on his lips. Boss, one of Asher's men called, pointing to a side door where Salvatore was trying to escape. Asher's eyes darkened. Stay here, he told Theo, before running after Salvatore. Salvatore sprinted toward the side exit as Asher chased him down. You can't run forever, Salvatore, Asher shouted, pointing a gun at him. Salvatore whipped around, pulling the gun from his waistband. You think you can take me, boy? Without hesitation, Asher fired, the bullet grazing Salvatore's arm and making him drop the gun. Before Salvatore could react, Asher closed the distance and tackled him to the ground. The sound of footsteps made Asher glance up. Chief Owens approached with several officers. We'll take it from here, Owens said, nodding to his team. Asher stood, his chest heaving as the officers cuffed Salvatore. This isn't over, Asher. You'll... Yeah. Asher interrupted. Save it for the judge. The warehouse was secured, and the remaining of Salvatore gang members were arrested by the police. Asher leaned against a wall, watching as Theo approached him cautiously. Theo hesitated, his hands fidgeting at his sides. Hey, he said softly. Asher turned to face him, his expression unreadable. Hey, Theo took a deep breath. I owe you an apology. I should have told you the truth sooner. Ash's gaze darkened. Yeah, you should have. Theo flinched at the bluntness but pushed on. I didn't want to deceive you, but I had a job to do. I never expected. He trailed off, his eyes searching Ash's face. Expected what? Asher asked, his tone sharp. I never expected to care about you, Theo admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought you were just some criminal, but you're so much more than that. Ash's expression softened, though his posture remained tense. You lied to me, he said quietly, but you also put yourself in danger to help me. I don't know how to feel about that. Theo stepped closer, his eyes pleading. I know I messed up, but I meant everything I said. Asher looked away, running a hand through his hair. You're a pain in the ass, you know that? Theo managed a small smile. I've been told. Ash's lips quirked upward, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. You risked everything for me, Theo. That's hard to ignore. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, Theo said truthfully. Asher met his gaze, the tension between them thick. You're lucky I care about you too, or I'd be a lot angrier right now. Theo's eyes widened. You care about me? Asher smirked, leaning in slightly. Don't make me regret saying that. Asher studied Theo's face, his tough exterior finally softening. Theo's heart raced, but this time, it wasn't because of fear or danger. You're full of surprises, you know that, Asher said, his voice low. Yeah, well, Theo murmured, his lips twitching nervously. I am to keep life interesting. Before he could overthink it, Theo closed the distance between them, kissing Asher. The kiss was slow at first, but it quickly deepened as Asher immediately kissed him back. Theo's hands gripped Ash's jacket, pulling him closer. It was messy and intense as Ash's hand started creeping down to Theo's butt. Ahem. The sharp sound of someone clearing their throat snapped them apart. Standing a few feet away was Chief Owens, arms crossed and a knowing grin plastered across his face. Well, I guess that's one way to build a partnership, Owens said, raising an eyebrow. But next time, maybe wait until you're not surrounded by cops and arrested criminals. Theo flushed crimson, stepping back awkwardly. I can explain. No need, Detective, Owens interrupted, holding up a hand. It's not exactly protocol, but after the way you two just work together, I can't say I'm surprised. Asher smirked, clearly unfazed. What can I say? He's irresistible. Weeks later, with overwhelming evidence against Salvatore, including testimonies from his own men, Salvatore was locked away for good. Asher spent a lot of time reflecting. He no longer wants to hide from the cops. He wants to go on public dates with Theo without looking over his shoulders every second. So, he shut the gang down and started a legal security firm. His gang members also worked for him, their loyalty remaining even as Asher told them they could leave if they want to and there would be no hard feelings. Asher's new business quickly gained traction. His security firm became a respected name in the industry. Many of his former gang members were grateful for the opportunity to turn their lives around. Theo and Ash's relationship blossomed as well, though it was not without its challenges. One evening, as they relaxed in Ash's apartment, Theo stretched out on the couch. You've been quiet, Theo said, glancing at Asher, who was seated beside him, typing on his laptop. Just thinking, Asher replied, shutting the device and turning to Theo. About what? Asher hesitated, then smirked. How I ended up dating the one person who was supposed to take me down. Theo laughed, leaning into Ash's side. Life's funny like that. Asher wrapped an arm around him, pulling him closer. Theo grinned, tilting his head up to kiss him. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was built on trust, forgiveness, and a shared determination to build a better future together. The end.